Hello and welcome to our Best Value Procurement Seminar here at the beautiful campus of Fort Garry, University of Manitoba. We welcome you here this afternoon. We have a great crowd. We have representation from public and private sector from within Winnipeg and the surrounding area, about 70 participants altogether, so a great turnout. Glad that you're all interested, maybe not as much as we are, but hopefully after this summer we'll be even more interested. My name is Paul Dugal. I'm the Manager of Purchasing Services here at the University of Manitoba, co-sponsoring this seminar along with Arizona State University. Let me just share with you, in the spirit of time, rather than self-introductions, because there are so many of you, maybe I can just identify what areas or organizations that you represent so that you know some of your colleagues that might be here. We have Canadian Tool and Die, Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, Manitoba Public Insurance, Manitoba Housing, Standard Aero, City of Winnipeg, Manitoba Hydro, Regional Health Authorities of Manitoba, Winnipeg School Division Number 1, Parker Hannifin Canada, Government of Manitoba, individuals representing themselves, and Arizona State University, as well as, of course, the University of Manitoba. We were introduced to the best value procurement methodology first by University of Alberta, who adopted this process, partnered with Arizona State University a few years ago, and they were the first to bring it into Canada. The process itself, the methodology, has been researched and taught by Arizona State University for over 20 years. John Savicki, who I'll introduce in just a moment, has been with that group, teaching and researching with them for over 15 years. And so we've contracted with, partnered with Arizona State University just over a year ago because of what we learned from the University of Alberta and other organizations since then. And we have conducted a few projects here since then. The end result, we've attracted and acquired the best suppliers that we could have with the projects that we conducted. We also ended up with much better results, phenomenal results, as compared to if we had conducted traditional RFP processes. So we certainly endorse the concept. It's not for every purchase that you would make, but it's certainly for any purchase that would involve an expert. So that could be services, it could be supply and install. It's almost everything that you could possibly put through an RFP. We've started with some high-risk ones, food services, cold beverage. And again, we took that gamble because we wanted to make sure that it did work, and it did work for us. It could have been the opposite if it didn't, but we were quite confident, and we're very happy that we did so. So I'll introduce you to our instructor this afternoon, John Savicki, who will lead us through the best value procurement methodology. John, as I mentioned, has been with the PBSRG. Now that would be, can you explain that one, John? No.
That's part of the issue.
The research group, teacher and researcher with the Arizona State University, and now partnering with the University of Manitoba, and has helped us through a number of projects here on campus for the past year. So I'll just turn it over to John.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, well, good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. We appreciate everyone's time. As Paul mentioned, my name is John Savicki from Arizona State University. We have partnered with the University of Manitoba to assist them in implementing some of these new concepts. And the goal of the implementation was to really help them in creating a different environment, an environment that truly attracts high-performing vendors. And what we try to go out and educate is for clients in becoming a client of choice, which means vendors will actually pick you over other clients because you're a better client to work for. And so we'll explain kind of what that means and how it works. As we go through this presentation, feel free to stop me at any time. The first part will be kind of the theory, some of the concepts behind the process, and then we'll dive into the process. Now, just before we get started, we heard the groups here, but Who here is like from purchasing or procurement? Okay, the majority of you. Okay, if you're not from purchasing or procurement, what's your primary role or function? So everyone's purchasing or procurement?
Legal.
Legal, okay. Anyone else? Contracting. In terms of procurements, how many of you primarily focus on construction? How many of you do IT? Okay, what are some of the other areas the rest of you procure?
Consulting services.
Okay.
Services.
Any other type of services? Okay. Okay. So we'll try to tackle all of those aspects. We are out of the School of Engineering, and our primary focus for the first 10 years was primarily in construction. We thought the construction industry was really bad, and we wanted to figure out ways to improve construction. And that's where our primary focus was, until one day a client brought us in and introduced us to IT. And that's when we realized that construction was way better than some of the other industries out there. And IT has been amazing to see what goes on there. So if that's what you procure, our heart goes out to you. We think we have a tool to make your life a little easier. So once again, we'll go through some theory, some process. Stop me at any time. Don't take any of this personally. This is just some of our findings from 20 years. We haven't done every type of project. We haven't seen everything. We've seen a lot, and this is just the findings that we've documented. So as Paul mentioned, we've done a lot of public, private, worked with the federal government. We've also worked on the vendor side. Has anyone actually been on the vendor side? Okay, no one here. So this might be a little interesting. So we've worked on both sides, and it's interesting to see the client's perspective versus the vendor's perspectives. And I'll show you some of the differences. We started off in the US, but we are global now. We're into Europe, Asia, and we're actually across Canada now. And as I mentioned, we started out in construction, but we've expanded to a lot of other areas. So once again, we haven't done every type of procurement, but we've done a lot of different types. You know, over 2,000 procurements, $5 billion. And these are some of our partners across Canada right now. So mostly universities, but we do have some cities and governments. So, okay, let's run through some theory. What are we looking for when you hear best value, right? The easiest picture, you've seen this probably. Your original contract and your change order. So, in very simple terms, most clients, when they hear best value, want higher performance in terms of getting projects done on time, on budget, with high satisfaction. And we agree with that. What we also want to do is make the process more efficient, both for you and for your suppliers, right? So we want to make a process that's more efficient and more effective for you. Allows you to manage or procure more projects with less effort. Now, when a project goes well, and maybe because we're in procurement, we don't actually see the end of projects when everyone's excited when a project goes well, what do you think they say that the reason that project was so successful? Regardless of what the procurement was.
The right team.
The right team. Have you ever heard, or do you think you would hear someone at the end of a project say, wow, this was so successful because we had the best terms and conditions? Or we had the best liquidated damages clauses in here. That is what drove this project to a success. It's not. And see, what a lot of other researchers is they're trying to focus on these other areas, and not to say that they have no impact, but what we're saying is that we've learned that the biggest impact is people, regardless of the procurement, whether it's construction, IT, services. It's getting the right people, the right team. And so that's what we're going to focus on here, is laying out a process where we give the advantage to those proposers that are giving us the best team. So What we'll do first is go through some concepts. And these, once again, things that we've learned in the industry. So when I start presenting, a lot of times people will focus on their specific procurement. And they'll say that that procurement is harder than anything else we've ever done. And so I just try to take an example that most people won't argue that this is harder than their procurement, or their procurement's harder than this. So brain surgery. Most people will agree that brain surgery is probably more complex or riskier than the procurement you're currently running. So if we take the traditional approach to hiring a brain surgeon, how would that approach look like in a traditional environment? What would be your first step? Well, typically it is find the cheapest surgeon. Okay? What's the second step? We do what?
Insure yourself.
Before even insurance, we do negotiation to get a better outcome. What does that mean? We say, hey, I know you said you could do it for this price, but we need you to drop it by 5 or 10%. And I know you said you could do it for 8 hours, but I already promised people I'd be somewhere in 4 hours. So you need to figure out a way to do it in less time. I don't like how those nurses look, so I want you to use these nurses. And I read a new technique on the internet of how to do brain surgery, and we want you to use this new technique. What happens to the potential success of the outcome? Does it go up or down? It goes down, right? And then when it goes down and it fails, what happens? What do? We act completely surprised, right? And then who do we blame? We blame the vendor, right? Now, does this happen in construction? Yes. Does this happen in IT, in services? Yes, yes, yes. Why do clients do these things? Now, of course, no one here does it, but why do other clients do these things? And we can be real honest here. Yeah, what we've learned is that a lot of owners have had such bad experience that they feel that this is what they have to do in order to do what? Try to drive performance up. And so what we're educating clients is there is an alternate way to do procurement where you don't have to do this. You know, because believe it or not, doing this to an expert does not increase your performance. It decreases it. Now, once again, we'll look at some other concepts here. So you have to kind of just relax, and we're just looking at extremes here. We have 4 different vendors that compete at different levels. Vendor 1 has the highest performance, brings you the least amount of risk. Vendor 4, lowest performance, highest amount of risk. And the red line is your minimum standard or minimum requirement or minimum spec. When you issue that minimum requirement, in your minds, what are you expecting? You expect to get something higher than that minimum, right? Now, out of those 4 vendors, who is going to get the award in the majority of cases? 3? Everyone agree? 4? Now, you're the legal rep, right? Why did you say 4? Did you say 4?
Lowest cost, probably.
So even if they're not meeting our requirement, we would still award to someone below that? No. That never happens, right?
No.
So why is our legal expert thinking it happens? Have you ever heard of projects that have claims and litigation? Have you ever, at the end of a project, been so upset with a vendor because they're not giving you what you thought they were going to give you? Yeah, it's because in our research we found we award based on cost, regardless of where they perform. And if it's contractor 4, we award to them, unless they're so far below it. But if they're below enough where we can't tell they're below, we award to them, and then we have problems, right? And unless it's so bad, most of the time we just make it through it. But if it's so bad, then we go to court, right? It happens all the time. And we'll go through the reasoning why that happens, right? Because there's a reason that happens. It's not intentional. Most clients don't intend to award to contractor for it, but it happens. And it's because right now our procurement system isn't easy enough for us to see differential. Now, understanding that this may occur, how do vendors interpret that? What does that do to vendor number one? What we've seen is now what they start doing is dropping their quality. Their biggest risk is to do what? Get the award. So what they do now is figure out ways to drop their quality, lower their price in order to try and win the award. And then once they've awarded the project, if you want higher performance, what happens? Change orders. Have you guys ever had change orders? Yeah. Yes. That's what we've seen. So it's funny because the perceptions are different. Clients will issue these standards or requirements thinking what? Those are minimums. The vendors will look at those exact same requirements and say what? They're maximums. Right? Because if we give you anything more, what happens? We're never going to get the award. Right? And what they have to do is be as below this, as sneaky as possible before you realize it, so that their costs can be more competitive than their competitors. What we're trying to explain to both clients and to vendors is there is a different way. There's an alternate way, an alternate process where we don't have to do this anymore. And hopefully we can explain that later today. Now, we have detailed instruction specs. This was for a project out at United Airlines, and this is about 6 months after these hangars were painted. The paint completely is coming off. So they hired us, they came to ASU and they said, okay, ASU, can you help us write better specs on how to prep surfaces so we don't get this? What is the issue here? Is the issue here that the spec wasn't good enough?
You're detailing the process versus the outcome. You should be, the spec should say the outcome, the paint must adhere for a minimum of 2 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And figure out how to do it.
What the problem was is they're hiring contractors that what? Need directions. We're hiring a painter that needs to be told what? How to paint. Right? The whole objective of outsourcing is to hire someone that what? Knows what they're meant to be doing. Right? The more details, instructions you give there, what type of contractors does that help? Yes. It helps the low performers. Why? Because all they have to do is say, oh yeah, I'll do that. You want me just to power wash it once? I'll just power wash it once. That's what you told me to do. Right? A good contractor can look at the surface and say what? Oh man, we may need to do like 3 power washes. We're going to have to wait 2 days before we do that. I mean, they just have that expertise. So now, once again, this is just theory. So we're not saying throw away all your specs, throw away your standards. What we're saying is instead of investing an exorbitant amount of time trying to figure out the right specs, we say use most of that time to hire an expert. Right? Hiring an expert will have a better outcome than writing a better spec. Spec data sheets or technical specs. Has anyone ever issued technical specs, whether it's IT or construction? Or anyone ever seen those? Okay, some of you have. How are these specs developed? By engineers. How do engineers develop them?
In private sector?
Copy and paste.
Copy and paste.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Of course, coming out of college, we didn't think that. We said, wow, this must have meaning. No, it's literally they go to a recent project and do what? Pull it off the shelf and issue it on this project. This is the most commonly specified roofing system in the 90s. Is this a good system? Okay, here's the outcome of this spec. Is it a good system? Okay, in looking at this versus this, Which takes us the least amount of time to make a decision? This one, right? How much expertise did we need to know about roofing to know if this was a good or bad system? Nothing. How about in this one? I mean, you would think technical roofing experts would understand this. You know, in years of presentations, none of them can tell me what this means besides 2,000 pounds per square inch. Right? But this is what's issued as the commonly specified roofing system, and it failed. But it had really good numbers that engineers liked. 2,000, wow. Must be a great system. So what does this mean now to procurement? What we're trying to educate clients is that when you collect information from your vendors, do you want more or less technical information? The answer we're saying is less. You want more performance information, because performance information is what? Very easy and simple to understand.
From my experience, what makes a world of difference is if you have a mandatory site visit. Because if the contractor actually saw the site, know it was a low-pitch roof, then they would they would think about the spec in a different application. So actually seeing the site is crucial.
Yes, and Kristen, remind me if we don't get there when we get to interviews about that, but I want to talk about roofing as well. You know, I'll explain the process. And yes, there are ways to make sure you're getting people that actually think about your project. Yeah, good comment. Now, warranties. We have warranties, right, that are going to protect us? Has anyone ever enforced a warranty here? Has anyone tried to enforce a warranty? Yes, okay. So in roofing, if any of you in roofing, and it's very amusing if you've never read a roofing warranty, but this, I took their name off of it. The only roofing system you'll need for the next 30 years, backed by the most unsurpassed guarantee 30-year against whatever the future brings. Okay? So if we have any issues, they're going to take care of it, right? How do they get out of this statement?
Exceptions.
Yes, every warranty has what? The super fine print, right? And when you read this, what does it say? It says, this statement is what? Void if any of this occurs, right? Has anyone read a roofing warranty? I mean, you really should do it if you have time. Just find one there. It's amazing what they have. The most common thing on here is your warranty is void if there's any water on your roof. I bet you 90% of your current roofing warranties have that. If there's water on your roof, your warranty's void. If anyone walks on the roof, your warranty's void. If there's abnormal use on the roof, what does abnormal mean? Who determines it? They do. If you don't agree, then what? Yeah. Who issues the warranty? It's your vendor, right? Who for the vendor writes the warranty? The lawyer. Is a company ever going to hire a lawyer to protect someone else from that company? They're hiring the lawyer to protect who? Themselves. These documents are here to protect them, not you. But a lot of clients think that these warranties are in their best interest. And that's why sometimes now you'll have roofing warranties with 22-year warranty. Why is it 22 years? Because everyone else has a 20-year. It's just marketing. I've seen some warranties where they'll say, this roof is guaranteed for blank years, and you can write in whatever number you want. It has no correlation to performance. Right? We've seen this in mechanical systems. So once again, the best warranty you'll ever have is a warranty that what? You never use. If day 3 you're looking at your warranty, what does that tell us? You've got problems. If day 3 you're reading the terms and conditions of your contract, you've got problems. The best contract, the best terms and conditions, the best warranty is one that you'll never look at after you sign it. And that is by getting the best people. At least that's what our research has shown. So can we create an RFP that's 100% accurate? Can you as a client? Or let's phrase this another way. What percent of your RFPs are 100% accurate?
0%.
0? Everyone agree?
Accurate in what way? What you're asking for or what you're getting? Or
In terms of what you need. You know, I presented to contractors this morning. Asked this question. It took him like 1 second for everyone in the room to say 0. 0%. And it's similar to when, you know, I teach class. When I teach class and I give all the students the same presentation, they have all the same book to read, right? All the same instructions, same homework. When they come in to take the exam, what kind of grades do they get? Is it all the same grade? It's all over the place. How can someone get an A and someone get an F when they have the exact same material? It's their perceptions, right? People's perceptions are different. And researchers have tried to create perfect RFPs and they found out it's not possible. Right? So once again, we're saying invest your time in just trying to find an expert. Right? This is out of business. What's described, specified, installable, what you needed. That's what we're looking for. We want someone, an expert, to listen to what we're saying up here, but instead of proposing what we told them to, they're actually going to propose what? What we need. Right? It's a different way of thinking. In order for them to do that, you have to change as a client. If you don't change, they're not going to start thinking like this. Right? If you go on the internet and you mistype something on a search engine and you hit enter, what happens? Right? Did you mean this? That's what you want out of your contractors, out of your service providers. Knowing that your RFP isn't accurate, you want them coming back to you and saying, wait, did you mean this? Right? In the current environment, they're not going to do that because it's not to their advantage. We need an environment that it gives experts the advantage for doing this. Now, in terms of resources, if a supplier, whether it's IT, construction, services, wants to seriously win on a project, how much does it cost them to propose on one of your RFPs? There's no right or wrong answer. If you had to guess, how much do you think it costs a supplier to respond to an RFP?
Depends if they're cutting and pasting from the last RFP.
Okay, if they actually really want to win it. Thousands? Does that surprise anyone? Okay, so you all know that they're investing thousands of dollars. How many proposals do you typically get on a project? 5? Okay, so you have 5 proposals. They're all spending thousands of dollars. Only one of them wins. What happens to all the thousands of dollars that everyone else spent? What happens to that? How many times can a vendor spend these thousands of dollars to win projects and lose it? Not many times. So in order for them to make a good decision, if they look at your project and see that they don't have a really good opportunity to win, what do? 1, they don't bid, but if they do bid, what do? They do the copy and paste. Why? Because it takes no money, right? You take a similar project, pull it out. Have you ever read a proposal and it's talking about a different project than yours? Yeah, they do it. Why do they do it? Because they know in your current environment, they don't have a fair chance at winning. So they're not going to invest $10,000 when it's a crapshoot. So what we want is a different environment that's more efficient for them that they can actually have a better chance at winning, so that they aren't doing the cut and paste. So right now, on most of these proposals, for the vendor, who's preparing them? Who in their organization is putting them together? The sales team. Who should be putting it together? Their technical expert. Big difference though, sales team and a technical expert. Now when you get these proposals, how big are your proposals on average when you receive them? This big? This big. Okay, so and you get 5 proposals this big. How many evaluators do you have on average? 3? 3 or 4. So how do the 3 or 4 evaluators evaluate these proposals? Okay, now our legal person has to cover their ears. How do we evaluate these proposals right now? Now, we're not talking about what we should do. How are they actually done? Do the evaluators read every page of every proposal? Are they meant to? Yes, but do they do that? No. Why not? Yeah, I heard someone last week saying, well, yeah, I was evaluating all day Sunday. I mean, they're taking these proposals home, doing it on Sunday. Right? What we've seen is evaluators will read the first few pages and either fall asleep or just go on the internet, play a little. They'll come back, skip 20 pages, read a half a page, skip another 20 pages, read half a page, and then try to assign a score. So we have these proposals coming in. We don't really go through them. And if we do, they're so technical that we don't know how to make sense of them. So what kind of scores do we give everyone? Maybe the same, unless we know who a firm, like a company is, and if we like them, we say, okay, maybe they're better just because of their name. And if they're all kind of the same, what does it revert back to then in the selection? It's cost. And that's why a lot of times clients that are issuing RFPs with other factors besides cost, they're still awarding the cost. And they think they're not going price-based, but they are going price-based because you've made everything else what? Worthless or meaningless. So once again, we think through our research, we've seen different ways of doing this, and we think there's a more optimal way, not only for vendors, but for you as well. Right? We think there's a better way to make this easier for you as evaluators. Okay, if we were to purchase an SUV, you have some of these technical requirements. Are any of them not important? Right? They can all be kind of important, right? Now, if the first dealership says, I got the perfect SUV for you, it's right here. Do you need any of this information here? If this is what they're trying to sell you. What happens? I mean, what should you do when they show you this? You should walk away, right? So how does this relate to procurement? We understand you're going to have specs requirements. What's done now is typically you have to go through each spec of every proposal to see if what? It meets the requirement, it doesn't meet the requirement, how well does it meet the requirement? But if the proposal is so bad and you're never going to hire them in the first place, does it make sense for you to go through all that? No. It doesn't. So what we want is a tool that allows you as an owner to quickly look at vendors and differentiate the vendors that look like this versus the vendors that look what? That look good. And we want you to be able to do that very fast and efficiently. Right? So the goal is to get the least amount of information. However, we want the right information to make the right decision. Okay, so that's really the majority of the theory we wanted to talk about. So we can all kind of take a deep breath. Hopefully that didn't offend anyone. Before we move on, are there any questions on any of that theory? Okay, so let's run through this best value process. what we're looking for is a true win-win, right? If you are represented as the baby and this is the vendor, if you're screaming every day, how great is the vendor's life? Not very good, right? You know, some people think there's such a thing as win-lose. Well, we found out there's no such thing. If one party is losing, guess what? Eventually, the other party will lose. So in order for this to work, we need a true win-win where you as a client get higher performance, you're more efficient, but at the same time, vendors are allowed to be what? More efficient as well. If they can be more efficient, they can maximize profit. Now, there's a difference between maximizing profit and charging you more. They're not the same. So they can actually charge you less money, but make more profit. Okay, so factors for success. Once again, we've been doing this for 20 years. Out of 20 years and over 2,000 procurements, this has only gone to court one time. And the contractor argued that this isn't fair because it didn't pick me. And the judge quickly threw it out. Right? The reason it's been successful, fair, open, honest, and transparent. And we'll describe what exactly that means. Okay, so we have 3 major steps: selection, clarification, and then post-award metrics. Award occurs after phase 2. In terms of what occurs, in phase 1, we have a high-level overview. Okay, all vendors will compete. They'll all submit proposals. We're going to look at cost, maybe time, a proposal, some sort of references, and then maybe an interview. From there, we will shortlist or narrow it down to one vendor that gets invited into phase 2. With that one vendor, we do a very detailed pre-plan, clarification, do our due diligence to make sure that vendor hasn't missed anything. Phase 2 is the most important phase. We do that with one vendor. It's the one vendor that makes it through phase 1. After phase 2, then we issue the award and we have metrics. Yes? Question? Yes?
So this is essentially a consecutive negotiated model.
Okay, you may have different terms than how I present, and so you may call it that. We don't like to use the word negotiation. For example, like the brain surgeon. We don't want to negotiate with the brain surgeon.
But it's consecutive as you take the best number one,
Yes.
talk with them, you clarify it, as long as everything's a go.
Yes,
the award.
correct. So we just say it's you're clarifying rather than negotiating, but yes.
When you're picking your vendor into the next stage.
Yes.
And it falls through, you can't come up with a deal, what do you do then?
You'll go to the second vendor. And out of 2,000 projects, it's happened less than 15 times.
How many?
15, 1-5. So it's like 99.999% the person you pick in phase 1 is the right person. And we can talk about those 15 cases, what fell through. Okay, so phase 2 is the most important. That's where we get all the details, all the technical information. We clarify everything in phase 2. Okay, keep that in mind as we're running through phase 1, because you're going to have questions. Right? You're going to say, well, shouldn't we get this? Shouldn't we get that? And the answer is yes, but we're going to get it in phase 2. Okay, so let's go in phase 1. So once again, we're not eliminating your specs, standards. We're not changing your contract terms and conditions. Okay, so in BestValue, we're not changing anything to your contract A, contract B. Everything else stays the same. So if something goes wrong, what happens? You have the exact same protection you have right now. There's no difference. The only thing that's changing here is how we're actually awarding. All we want to do is an award to someone that brings us the least amount of risk. Okay, so phase 1, you'll have different attachments. In your RFPs right now, if you had to rate them on a scale of 1 through 10, where 10 is great and 1 is not so great, I mean, where would you rank your RFPs in terms of how easy they are for your vendors to understand and follow?
It depends if it's a non-binding or binding RFP.
Okay, give me the two then.
So out of those two, I would say the non-binding is a lot easier.
A lot easier?
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking to a lot of vendors, a lot of them struggle with your RFPs because the requirements of what they have to turn in are written throughout this. How big are your RFPs? Pretty big, right? And it's hard for them to understand what to turn in. So this isn't really best value, but what we found is just make all of their submittals attachments. And this is all they have to submit. So no longer do they have to read page 60 to figure out, wait, I have to turn in a 4-page on this and then scan a few more pages and figure out what else to turn in. Make it all attachments. It makes it easier for your vendors to submit proposals. Okay, criteria and weights. Now those of you that are doing RFPs, I'm assuming you're issuing criteria and weights, correct? What do you typically weight cost versus performance? On average?
Cost is usually
30%?
20 to
20%?
40.
40? Okay, typically we'll say keep it between 20 to 30. You're obviously in control, but typically we'll see most clients do between 20 to 30%. And because it's the intent, we want to explain to the vendors that yes, cost is important, but performance is more important. Okay, so as we go through the steps here in this phase 1, keep in mind, it's like if there's a speck of gold in this pile of dirt, if you were to sit there and look through every speck one at a time, what would happen? I mean, it would take forever. So how do they do it? They have like what? The different filters? So what we have is we have different steps here that aren't going to guarantee we're not going to get a low performer. What they're going to do is gradually filter out the non-performers. Okay, so past performance. How do you currently, if you do collect it, how do you currently collect past performance? Does anyone collect past performance? Or how about anyone do references? Okay, you ask for references. What do you ask for?
Similar size, scope of work.
So they have to submit one person, 3 people, 3 names,
3 projects.
3 projects.
No.
Okay, so they turn that in. And what do you do with those 3?
We weigh them against the project if they're relevant to the project we have, or
Okay. Do you ever call those references? What % of the time do you call every reference of every proposal on every submittal?
Depends if you.
100?
It depends if you know the vendor as well.
Okay, so there are times where you don't call? Yeah, we found that a lot of times clients may not call everyone. They wait until either you're shortlisted or you make it almost to the end, and that's when they'll call because it's just not efficient to call everyone. Okay, so this is going to be similar, but there are some differences here. In how we propose in doing past performance, it is to actually send out a survey and have the vendor, instead of just turning in 3 points of contact, it's going to be 3 surveys they're turning into you from their past clients. Any questions on that? The other major difference is we're not just collecting it on the firm. We're collecting it on the people and their critical subcontractors, subconsultants, suppliers, manufacturers, their team. Okay, so most clients only ask for 3 references, which is normal, and it's mostly just on that firm. What we're saying is we want references on the entire team, and we don't just want names to call, we want an actual survey. So this survey will be in the RFP. The vendor fills it out, sends it to their past clients. Their past clients fill out the survey form, turn in the survey, and the contractor or suppliers will average their surveys, and now you get their average score on their past performance. Questions or comments? Yes.
Aren't you inherently going to get good news?
Okay, are you going to get good surveys? Yes. What kind of surveys do you think they turn in now? References?
The best.
Yeah, are they ever going to give you a point of contact of a bad project? Hopefully not, but I've seen some people do. If they're smart, they're not. So there is no difference in how they're currently doing it, right? Someone else had a hand.
Does the person doing the survey give it back to the vendor who then sends it in?
Yes. Yes, it goes back to the vendor. Now, for 10 years, we actually were collecting surveys, and we found that that's not the right way to do business, because now you're responsible for all their surveys. You want them collecting their surveys, so they're responsible for it. Now, if they're responsible for their surveys, wouldn't you expect them all to get 9s or very high ratings? You would expect that, right? So why are we doing this then?
It's to see you've done your due diligence.
It's a little bit more than that.
Telling you where they have to improve.
Yes, but if they're just turning in like their 3 best, they should be pretty high scores.
So if they don't have anybody that's that high, they won't turn it in.
Ah, remember, this is like a filter. So on our scale of great contractors to really bad contractors, we want to filter out who? This percent of contractors that can't even do what? Turn in 1 good survey. Right? So vendors, when they see this, the vendors that know they're bad will look at this and say, this is too much work, we'll go bid somewhere else. Right? So all we're trying to do, and we don't even have to filter it, it just scares them away naturally. The bottom percent of vendors won't even compete because they know, 1, they have no good performance on their company or their people. So that's why we're doing it. It's just to filter out the bottom, the worst of the worst.
Do you check up on this survey? Like, you call that vendor that gave them the good survey?
So you have all these surveys. We would propose you only call which one? The surveys of the vendor that what?
That you might award to.
Which is the vendor in phase 2. So during phase 2, that's where you should call them up to verify. Correct. But in phase 1, I wouldn't call everyone up. It's not very efficient for your time.
How much additional time do you think this adds to the tendering process?
Typically, this is done in the same amount of time. So if you give them those 3 weeks, this is part of that 3 weeks. I would propose on your first project, if you do this, you give them like maybe an extra week. If you can. If you can't, then you can't. But this is new. The vendors need to be educated. I've seen vendors turn in surveys that have bad scores. And then they come back and complain and they say, well, we didn't think you were actually going to look at the scores. You guys have never done that in the past, so this isn't fair. Okay, so you got to be careful. If you've never looked or made phone calls, they're going to think this is business as usual. So you got to educate them that you are going to act differently. Because some of them won't believe you.
Yeah, I have a feeling that if you have a supplier that has a balance of power on their side, you're probably not going to be responding to this.
You know, in all of our procurements, we haven't run into that issue. And I mean, there are special cases. There are cases where there's a very small community that do that specific type of trade. But for most projects we've seen, there's always at least one good vendor out there that is attracted to this. And that's all you need. All you need is one expert out there. But yes, if it is an area that there aren't a lot of people, BestValue is not going to solve all your problems, right? So you're going to be stuck in that environment no matter what process you use, right?
Whose signature is required on the survey?
The end client. So in the past, what we used to have, when we first started off, we used to have a 4-page survey that was like 100 questions. It was very technical. So if we had mechanical, we'd ask about, how good is this carrier system? How good can they do high voltage, low voltage? And has anyone filled out surveys? Whether it's like online hotel surveys, car rentals. I mean, when you have an idea of how well that service went, what happens to the questions? Do you read each question? What happens? You just go 10, 10, 10, 10, 9, whatever. And so we actually, fortunately, students are very cheap for us. So we hired a student, a PhD student, and said, hey, we want you to do a statistical analysis. And they went through all this surveys, and they figured out that asking 3 questions will give you the exact same result as asking 75 unique questions. Because once someone has an idea of whether they like you or not, that's the score they're going to give you. So we have a little bit more questions, but really all you need to ask is, are you satisfied, and would you hire them again? Right? So in your survey questionnaire, it doesn't need to be very technical, but what also makes a difference is give them space to write and just say, what are the biggest problems you ran into? What would you do differently? Right? This probably will give you more information than the actual survey scores, but these scores you can actually use in the evaluation. That's the difference.
If the surveys don't come back in, are they non-compliant and eliminated, or they just get a lower score?
It's been done both ways. So some clients in the US, the federal government says you cannot disqualify anyone for not having surveys. So in that case, what the client said is if you have no surveys, we're going to give you 5 scores. Because 5 is the average. It's not 1 and it's not 10. So 5 is like we don't make a decision. So that's more of a policy call than it is a best value call. But we would say, yeah, probably just give them 5s and let them compete. Because if it's a brand new company, you know, you may not want to say you can't bid on this project. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we can come back to past performance. Paul, you said we had to break at?
I'll go check.
Okay. Okay, your written proposal. We've talked about this, so your proposals can be kind of big. What we want to do here is make this, once again, efficient for you and efficient for the suppliers. So, first thing is, these proposals cannot have any names in there. Cannot contain their company names, any project names, any product names, any people names. See some frowns. Okay, so the proposal that they're going to be turning in, which we haven't talked about yet, we're going to go through, but the document that's going to be scored by your evaluators cannot contain any names. Comments on that?
Who does all the administration work to remove all that?
They are educated that they're not allowed to put that in there.
You're saying it's the proponent or the bidder that's putting.
Is required not to put their name in there. Now on the client side, so you're going to get a document now, right, that has no names. Are you comfortable with that?
Well,
Let's be
procurement
honest.
maybe, but your client is obviously.
Okay, so
not.
procurement's comfortable? It's the clients we know won't be comfortable. Why won't the clients be comfortable?
Because they already have a predetermined notion.
They want to pick their favorite. Once again, if you want a fair, open, honest, transparent, if you want to attract new and high performers, this is the way to do it. If you want to keep those companies away, then yeah, keep picking your favorites. But if you want to attract better vendors, this is what you have to do. Will all clients like this? No.
What kind of feedback did you get from vendors, suppliers when you implemented this?
They love it. So 99% love it. The 1% that don't love it are who?
Your favorite.
The incumbents or the favorites. And they say, oh, this is not a good idea. And that's once again why this is so successful, because it's very hard now for vendors to protest. Because what? The evaluators don't know who you are. Right? They can't argue that you're picking your favorite because you don't know who your favorites are anymore. Okay, so we can get back to this. Do we have a few more minutes, Paul?
A few more minutes or whenever it's convenient to
Okay.
ready.
So risk assessment plan. So we want to look at this proposal. The proposal has 2 major documents, a risk assessment and a value assessment. So 2 major components to their proposal. The risk assessment, we want them to look at our project in terms of risk, right? And we understand that vendors all have different levels of expertise, but vendors that have a lot of expertise can actually pretend as if they've already completed the project. And they can look back and say, these are all the major risk items that you could potentially run into, and here's how we're going to avoid them. So some examples here. This is out of IT. The state will be at risk at hiring small firms or integrators due to their limited resources, vague long-term plans, and struggles with technology changes. So what are they saying?
Hire us 'cause we're big.
Guess what their solution says? Our company has over 30,000 employees, revenues of more than $4 billion. This reduces the state. This reduces the risk to the state, sorry. So they're saying the risk is hiring a small company. Do you think there's any small companies that can perform? Oh yeah. And they're saying, because we're big, you have no risk. Is there any big companies that have ever failed? I mean, what kind of score do we give this item? Well, maybe not a 10, right? For sure. If you had to guess who wrote this for the company, can you see a salesperson writing this? Right? It doesn't take, we don't have to be experts in IT to kind of see this. We can close our eyes and see the salesperson writing this. This is at Harvard University. They were doing a renovation to a library during finals week. That's when they scheduled a demo. So noise was an issue. Vendor 1 says, partnering is the key to success. We're going to work with the user to develop the best strategies that can be implemented to minimize the impact of noise. Comments?
No specifics.
Probably just reiterate what you had in your RFP.
Another vendor, to minimize this risk, we're going to do demolition during off hours and weekends. We'll also install rubber sheets on the floors to diminish noise. Which one would you rather interview? Bring to the interview. Is this guaranteed to minimize the risk? No. But is this a better solution than that? Yes. Did we have to have any technical expertise as construction people to see the difference between the two? No, we could all see it. How much technical information did I need to tell you about this project for us to see the better vendor? Right? Almost nothing. So in the evaluation process, I mean, that's what we want. We want a process that anyone can read these proposals and clearly see who? Our experts from our non-experts. A poor performing roofing system can cause a number of issues. To minimize this risk, we're going to use a system that's been installed 400 times, average age of 18 years, 99% of the roofs don't leak. Or vendor B, we're going to use a thermally welded roofing system with a tensile strength of 2,000 psi. Which one can we understand? A. They could be the exact same system, but we can understand this more than we can that. So we want to educate our vendors to do what? More performance, less technical. Right? So this does require education on the vendor side. And I'll skip this example. I mean, we got tons of examples here. Uncontrollable risk. So we have risks that they control, risks they don't control. What are some risks that a vendor can't control? Any vendor. The weather. What else? What's that? The economy. I mean, there's a number of things, right? They have no control over. Can they control you? Right? They can't force you to do anything, right? I mean, so in this example, this is a project that had a lot of grass that they had just installed, and they had to get water to irrigate the grass or it'll die. So the solution is we're going to coordinate and plan with the water company as soon as the award is made to make sure we get water to irrigate the fields. So as a contractor, you have no control over your utility company. So what are our comments on the solution here?
The water company doesn't want to play ball.
Yeah, so we want to plan what if they don't do that. We're not saying you're responsible for it as a contractor, but we want to see is do you have a plan or some ideas that can be implemented to minimize the risk? And 1 out of the 8 vendors came back and said, if they fail to meet our schedule, we can connect to nearby fire lines or fire hydrants, or we can rent water trucks to irrigate the fields. Is that going to cost more money? Yes. But is this a better solution than that? Right? We're looking for vendors that are thinking at our project thinking ahead and identifying what the risks are and what the plans are to mitigate those risks. This is food services. So this is a project where the vendor is actually hired to generate revenue. Okay, so this is revenue generated. So the risk is, the university has stated that construction to the cafeteria will be completed on time. Any delays to the cafeteria will impact our ability to generate revenue. So if the cafeteria is not done, we can't sell food, right? But we can't control you in completing the cafeteria. From our experience, 30% of renovations are delayed a minimum of 3 months. To mitigate the loss in revenue, we will bring in mobile trailers. These trailers can prevent high-end meals along with fast food options for students on the go. We will place these trailers in high-traffic areas and install signage. We did this at another university, and we were able to generate 5% revenue during the 4-month delay. Comments on that? Is this a good solution? Yeah. I mean, can you see that? I mean, we don't have to be food experts to see what? This is an expert. And so that's the beauty here is we now, even as evaluators, no longer have to have expertise in the things that we're procuring. Now anyone can be an evaluator. Anyone can understand if it's a good risk and a good solution versus a poor risk and a poor solution. Right? It makes it easier and faster. Okay, so do we want to take a break here before we get into value assessment?
So I just wanted to, because of some of the comments, and just because we've got a break, just say a couple things. One is that we're hearing that some of us are familiar with some of these concepts, but we're calling it something else. We either worked with it or heard of it, and I went through that too. I've been in this business for 30-odd years, always looking for a better RFP, and some of the elements in here, I think all of the elements, I've heard at one time or another, but the uniqueness of this is that it combines it all together, and it's the various pieces that have been refined, researched, and taught, that when you combine them together, that are very effective. So each of those pieces alone, yes, we may have a process that we're familiar with, but I don't believe, I've never talked to anybody unless they've gone through this, that actually is familiar with the culmination of all the pieces. John will combine them all in this last part of the session, and you'll see how they all fit together. The other thing is that I've been through this process a number of times, and our staff have been through it as well. And a year and a half of going through it, whether it be at a conference presentation, whether it be at a presentation like this, or whether it be at the vendor presentations that we give, or sessions we're giving to our clients here on campus. Each time we're learning more and more about the process. I was talking to some of the staff at the break, and oh yeah, there's these little pieces that, you know, as you hear it again, you realize the benefits of it. And there was a piece that I recall that I thought I got it. Hopefully you'll get it at the end of today, but you'll get some of it. I guarantee you won't know it all, and because none of us have. I heard this presentation at a 3-day workshop, came back to the university and said, this is fantastic, we've got to do this. And then I tried to explain it in a nutshell. I just couldn't. I just could not explain what John did, but try and put that in a 5 or 10 minute discussion with a senior executive. So just to understand that it takes a long time to grasp the components. I didn't catch one part until we were actually involved in a project, and it was a client that said, what? You mean we're not even going to evaluate their proposal? What's an RFP if you don't evaluate a proposal? And it was then when the light went on that although I heard the theory and saw everything about it, I didn't realize that that was so different for them and they couldn't get around it to actually be able to single out the dominant expert from those that are non-dominant, as John is explaining, to be able to select that one supplier from the stage 1 to work with in the stage 2, and rarely ever, I've never heard an example in Canada either of that supplier not being selected then for the award through that clarification process. So it may even take for you to participate in a proposal to really understand what this is about. So I just wanted to add those couple of comments. Thanks, John.
Yeah, good comments, and maybe when I'm done, Paul can come back up and you can ask him questions. And and also Jurgen's.
Sure, why not?
You know, they actually ran a couple of projects. So what we say is, you know, having me come up here, and we do this in 3-4 day conferences, and, you know, present this, and I teach a course on this all semester long on this. So to learn it in a couple hours, it's tough, but, you know, we can try to teach you, but right now it's kind of just sounds like a sales pitch. Your best education is actually trying this, right? In their first 2 projects, I mean, they learned more than me educating them. And the next step after you actually try it is, like Paul said, is then to try and educate someone else, right? Teaching someone else, that's when you truly have to be a master, right? So we can talk more with Paul. You can ask him definitely more questions when we get to the end. But jumping back into the process while we're on break, did we have any questions on the risk assessment? Now, there was a question brought up, some of you might not be in here. It's if we know that there are risks, should we have the vendors address the risks? Should we give them known risks that we have as a client?
Of course.
Okay, we think we should. Now, what we're proposing is we shouldn't. Why do we say we shouldn't? And it's because if you give the vendors the risks, who does that help? What kind of vendor? Why does it help the non-expert out? Because they could have never thought of that risk. Why doesn't it help the expert out? He already knows the risk. So we're not saying hide things, but a true expert that's done this 50, 100 times over 20 years should be able to look at your project, even though it's slightly different, and say, I know exactly the biggest concerns on your mind, and I know the biggest risks on this project, because we have that experience. Now, in their plan, in that risk document, if they don't address it, what happens to that risk if no one's addressed it? Can you still bring it up? The answer is yes. When can you have them address it? In phase 2. Okay, so you still have time to have them address the risk, but what we're proposing is give the high performer their advantage. Let them prove to you that they're an expert. Okay, any other questions on risk assessments? Okay, the next document is a value assessment. So we want the vendor looking at our project in terms of risk. Then we want them looking at our project in terms of value-added ideas. So if this was their project, if this was their money, what would they do? How would they spend the money? What would they do to make this better than what you've described? And the easiest, the best example we have is this is a project, the U.S. Coast Guard, and all they wanted was to replace this roof, an old roof. They wanted to replace it to stop all the water leaks. We had 8 or 9 contractors walk the roof, submit proposals. Only one of the roofers came back and said, your roof isn't just leaking, or the building isn't just leaking from your roof. You got cracks in your walls, broken glass, and the high quality caulking here around all the glass, right, around the entire building. For an additional amount of time and money, we can come in and replace all of this to waterproof your building. Okay, so the scope is what? We want a new roof. They're saying, we'll give you the new roof. However, you may want to consider doing these things because you also need this. Do you have to accept that idea? No. Do you have to pay for that? No. But what you're doing is you're giving the expert an opportunity that what? They're actually acting in your best interest. Right? We can give them credit for thinking in our best interest. Any questions on that?
Is there any chance that a losing bidder would say, well, I didn't know you wanted to do that? If I didn't know you wanted to do that, then
Okay, if someone claims that, what do we say? What's our response?
should you know us?
You all had the opportunity. We all said, give us value-added options. You had the opportunity to come up with that. The fact that you didn't, I mean, that's not our fault. We didn't know that either. Because if we knew that, what would we have done? We would have mentioned it. Right? So everyone has that same opportunity. So to answer your question, no one's ever actually argued that. Because they all do have that same opportunity. on an IT project, I don't know a lot about IT, but apparently there is full-time licenses and concurrent licensing. So in this structure, basically, the scope was the state wanted like 200 full-time licenses, and this vendor is saying, well, you know, if people are on vacation, then basically you're wasting money on these licenses because you're not using them. So instead of purchasing 200 full-time licenses, we'll give you 50 full-time licenses and give you 150 concurrent licenses, which basically jump around. You use them as you need them. And by doing that, you can save 25% in cost, and we've done this 5 times with 100% satisfaction. Comments on that? Now, if you don't know anything about IT and you hear this, what are we thinking? Would you accept this if you don't know anything about IT?
Sure, why not? Because you're getting a savings, right? So you're thinking, sure, sounds good.
Okay, but just because something is cheaper doesn't always mean what?
Good value.
And you have people that can't use the software because the licenses aren't working.
Okay. So what we did, and this vendor actually made it into phase 2. During phase 2, we said what? Give me these 5 clients. And we called up all 5 clients. We said, have you done this? They said, yes. How does it work? They explained how it worked. We said, are you happy? They said, yeah. It's been outstanding. We haven't had any issues. Right? At that point, they took this option, and this actually saved them over $1 million on this IT project. Why didn't the state think of it up front? They actually hired a consultant to write the spec. Why didn't the consultant think of it? I mean, we're humans, right? People make mistakes. Right? That's why we're looking for experts. Right? They saved over $1 million. They also had 8 proposals, and only 1 vendor came up with this idea. The document is limited to 4 pages max. I see some people laughing. I see some heads going like this, and I see some people not excited.
You mean the one they send back to you, like the form of proposal, or do you mean the full tender that you give?
That risk assessment, 2 pages. The value assessment, 2 pages. That's all they're turning in what they're going to be scored on, is 4 pages. Yeah, so they're still turning in a cost proposal, their survey scores, you know, all their other certifications. But in terms of what's being scored now, it's only these 4 pages versus the binder.
So that is like your form of proposal
Yes.
in different terminology?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, comments on that?
Someone will read it.
It's easier to read now. Absolutely. Right? It's like when we give exams and we ask for a short response from the student, and the student writes like half the page, turns over and writes the entire back page. What's that student doing?
Bullshit.
They are trying to regurgitate everything they can remember in hopes of what? I reading it and I say, oh wait, I think they're saying the right answer here. Right? And if you've read a lot of proposals, and some of you, and I made the comment, no one ever reads it. Some of you actually read every proposal, or you have, and God bless you, because not a lot of you do that. But if you read them, I mean, you can tell the vendors that are doing what? Throwing in garbage versus those that aren't. And we learned that very quickly. And so we suggest limiting it. We actually do 1 page, but most people are very uncomfortable, so we increased it to 2 pages. We're doing a $1.2 billion project right now with the University of Western in Ontario, and they're doing it 3 pages each. Some of our clients have increased it in the past, and the research after doing it for a year showed that by increasing the page limits, all you get is more garbage from the vendors that don't know what they're talking about. So once again, how do we give the advantage to our experts? Limit the page numbers. Will all your clients be comfortable with that? No. Okay, the two things that most organizations want, why they won't use this, is because of no names and the page limits. Okay, and that's why the majority of you probably in here won't ever use it. And we're okay with that. But what we're saying is if you want to attract the best people, you have to do that. That's the environment that gives the best people the advantage.
So what do you do if somebody gives you 10 pages when you ask for 2? Are they non-responsive?
Yes. Yeah, you have to educate them. Now, you know, once again, if this is your first pilot project, you may, you know, play with them and say, okay, can you resubmit it? But generally, we say these are the rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you're thrown out. So no names, 2 pages. Now, what happens if they have 10 pages of risks? What should the vendor do?
Should say something prior to the, to see if you can.
Not quite. Close. If all 10 pages have legitimate risks, but we're saying you can only submit 2, what should they do?
Say they have more.
Submit the critical, prioritize and submit the dominant risks on those 2 pages. The other 8 pages of risk will be addressed where? Phase 2. So we're not saying we don't want to look at anything else. We're just saying in phase 1, we want 2 pages. Give us the most critical risks up front. Everything else we'll look at in phase 2. Okay, any other comments? Well, once again, this is just the most optimal way. Can you increase page limits? You can, but what we're saying is the higher the number of the pages, the bigger the advantage you're giving to your low performers, because they will trick you into believing that they're performers. They will confuse you, just like my students try to confuse me. Okay, so how this all works. So the submittal, which includes the cost, a schedule, all the surveys, and then also the 2-page risk assessment, 2-page value assessment, that's their entire package. So overall, it may be 10 pages. So this entire document goes into the purchasing officer. They separate the costs, all those other documents, from just these 4 pages. Those 4 pages are the only things that the evaluation committee sees. They don't see anything else. Right? They score this individually, set in their scores. So at no point in time can a vendor claim you're picking your favorite because they don't know any names. They don't even know who submitted. They won't even know who has submitted a proposal, nor will they see any costs. So now vendors can't claim you're giving the high score to the low bidder because no one even knows the costs. Right? This is why it's so fair and so hard to protest, because we've totally tried to eliminate all potential bias. The other thing we're doing here is the evaluation committee scores it individually and not as a group. It's not a group consensus. Does anyone do it as a group consensus now, or do y'all do it individually? Okay, we propose doing it individually because if you do it as a group and the boss is in the room, or you have someone that will talk for days, generally everyone else does what? They say, oh, you're right. I didn't mean to give him 10. I meant to give him 1, just like you said. Right? So we want to minimize that bias so that no one can claim that one person is influencing everyone else.
So after they do it individually, you take the average?
Yes. So this is an average of the evaluators. Typically it's 3 to 5 people, which I'm guessing is what you have now. Someone, I believe you asked up here. So in terms of the evaluators, who should be an evaluator? In this process, what we suggest is having people that can minimize their personal bias. And sometimes we've seen it's hard for technical experts to minimize their bias. For example, I had a proposal come in. It was to renovate lights in a dormitory at a university, electrical project. Very small project. 4 vendors competed. Most of them said the biggest risk is you turn off the lights in the dorm, the hallways will be dark, so we'll put up temporary lighting. We'll tell you what hallways we're going to turn off at night, during the day, we'll give you a schedule. Right? Very generic risks. One vendor came in and said the biggest risk is having male electricians work in all the female dorms, in their bathrooms, in the showers. That's the greatest risk. To minimize this risk, we're going to hire female electricians to work in the female dorms and male electricians to work in the male dorms. Does that sound like a good idea? One of the evaluators on this said, horrible idea, I'm giving that person a 1 out of 10 score. And I said, why are you going to do that? He said, I've been in the electrical industry, my father's been in the electrical industry, and my grandfather's been in the electrical industry. There's no such thing as a female electrician. This contractor's lying. And he was dead serious. I thought he was joking. He was dead serious. And I said, well, I'm not an electrician, but what if there is? What if they've hired the only female electrician in the world? And he said, well, if they did, then their cost is going to be twice as high, and I still don't want him. Right? Now, that vendor actually, the rest of everyone else gave that vendor the highest score. They got on the project. They had a female electrician. Everything went great. Right? This person still was upset. But once again, they were what? Using their personal bias to influence them. Right? So if you can minimize your personal bias, then you can use technical or non-technical. But as you saw through the examples, you don't have to be a technical expert to see the difference anymore.
But you need to do the performance criteria properly in order to do that.
Yes, so you still need your technical experts. They still need to define a very good scope, right? You still need to do a good scope up front. Then what I would do is use those technical experts in phase 2. But in phase 1, you can use non-technical experts. So what we're doing is trying to use your technical experts' time more efficiently. So instead of them reading all the proposals, we just bring them in the end to go through one proposal and make sure technically this vendor isn't doing something funny. One final part here. To this evaluation matrix, what we've seen and what we did for the first 10 years was we used a 1 through 10 rating system. What we're doing now is a 1, 5, or 10 rating system. It's no longer 1 through 10. There's no such thing now as a 5.5 and a 5.6 score, or a 5.5 and a 5.8. If they're that close, what do they get? They both get 5s. What that does now, it minimizes the evaluator's ability to try and make a decision. Right? No longer is one word in a proposal going to make a difference between a 5 and a 5.1 score. Right now, we're looking for what? 5 or 10, which means the proposals have to be what? Dominantly different. That means any of us can read them and see the differences now. If you look at your current scoring system, what % of the time would you say your evaluators give the exact same score, or they're consistent? Has anyone actually kind of looked at that? You have?
Well, what we're doing on a lot of them is breaking down, because we're not using this type of model and we're more prescriptive in each of the elements, it's scored out of a 2, they get a 0, a 1, or a 2.
Okay.
Right, and they know ahead of time what criteria meets perfect score, what would be acceptable for half points, and what's unacceptable.
Okay.
So they know ahead of time, and the evaluation team has helped determine the criteria based on the RFP because it's a contracted situation.
Has anyone just used the 1 through 10 rating system? You have. Have you looked at like how consistent your evaluators are on each project? Like, do they all come up with the same scores, or do you do a consensus?
I would say that they're not always across the board the same, but
Yeah.
they're quite close, so you would assume that they're probably going around the table together.
Yeah, and looking at some of other systems in our research, we see that it's typically between 20% consistency. In this rating system, you can get it 80 to 90% consistent. Right? It makes it easier to defend now. If 80 to 90% of your evaluators are giving the exact same score versus 10% of them, you know, it's easier to defend. Right? And that might be similar to the 0, 1, 2. But we use the 1, 5, 10 just so it brings a bigger differential to the proposals, the ones that stand out. Any questions on the evaluation or the rating system?
I have a question about
Yes.
the first phase. So you showed us a slide where you had your evaluation criteria and you actually prioritized them and showed the weights.
Yes.
Is that something that you're suggesting we do when we create the RFP? We let the vendors know how we're gonna score them?
Do you normally not do that?
We don't.
Does anyone do that? You do. We would propose absolutely putting that out there so they understand what's important to you. Right? It's like knowing that the project has to be complete by August because students are coming back, but we don't want to tell them. Right? It doesn't make sense. Now, on the same topic, how many of you give out your budgets on every project? It depends.
We do sometimes.
So the majority of the time you do?
Sometimes we give project, not all of them. The majority, I would say no, but probably.
Now,
some.
what's the reason you don't? Is it because you don't have one or because you don't want to give it out?
If we give it out, then everybody, if we say we have 10 million, then everybody's gonna be 10 million.
Okay, now who's giving out their budgets? You have. And when you give out their budgets, does everyone bid to the budget?
No, I did one recently where I said the budget is X, but we're still scoring your price, so bid accordingly.
And
So-
their costs were where?
Below.
Yeah. And that's when our, see, and it's funny because we've seen this in Canada a lot. A lot of clients are very hesitant to give out your budgets for that reason. You think by giving it out, vendors are all going to bid to that budget. And that doesn't happen because they have to be cost competitive. If there's 5, unless they're all in collusion, right? If all 5 are in collusion, maybe they can do that. But all it takes is one to do what? To bid low, right? And that screws up everyone's system. If you look at an expert versus a non-expert, or a high performer and a low performer, what is the low performer's greatest advantage to you? Or what is their biggest selling point? Their cost. So if you have a $10 million budget and the expert comes in at 10 million and the low bidder comes in at 10 million, who are you going to hire? Obviously the expert. The only way this one can have an advantage is to do what? Bid as low as possible. They don't even care about your budget. If you release your budget, couldn't make a difference to them. Why? Because they're going to do what? They're going to bid as low as possible and look at your spec and only bid exactly what's in your spec. Giving out the budget helps this vendor in determining what? What they can offer you, right? Within your constraints. And that's been difficult for some of our clients, but in some of these examples at the end, reluctantly, some of our clients have given it out and they've seen exactly what you've seen. We had a construction project, a $22 million budget. We had 6 submittals. The highest bid came in at $19 million in a $22 million budget.
But you wouldn't find that there'd be all these value-added suggestions if they come in lower, but then have all these value-added points that you think, well, gee, maybe we should do that.
Yes.
Knowing that you've got this budget to work with.
Yes, you can. And that's what they want to do. So they're going to say, this is what we'll provide for your budget. However, you still have $2 million left over. And this is what you can do if you want to spend that $2 million. Here are some ideas, right? But if they know your budget's at 20 and what you're telling them is like 22 million, what are they going to do in their value-added option now? They're going to do the reverse. They're going to say, what you want is way more than what you can afford. So these are the things that you should do what? Pull out of your scope or changing your scope to bring it within budget. For example, we had a cafeteria they were building and they wanted copper ceilings in all their rooms, right? And that cost like $1 million and they couldn't afford it. And so the vendor came in and said, all we have to do is replace the copper with something else and we can bring you within budget. Right? But without telling them that budget, what happens? They won't know what to propose.
So in that case, how do you compare the apples to apples in the proposal?
Yes.
Because they're proposing different components. Because
So-
that's often a dilemma, exactly the
Yes.
scenario you might.
So you have to do the due diligence up front in putting together a good scope. Okay, now best value will still work if your scope's not good, but it'll work better. You'll get better costing if you have an accurate scope. So in terms of accurately defining your current environment and then accurately defining where you want to go. If you can do that very well, you'll get better cost proposals that are more apples to apples. If you don't do that very well, vendors are going to make a lot more assumptions and the costs may be a lot more spread apart.
Because often our client departments don't know the market
Yes.
value of the services they're requiring, and they do have the scope to big. And in procurement, we'll say, we don't think that's realistic, but because they've so often said, here's our budget, and the vendors will do the reverse engineering and say,
Yes.
okay, this is how much quality I can give you for that. They
Yes.
have no clue because they haven't been paying market value.
Well, the vendors won't be able to do that if you don't give them that budget. So then they'll start costing out exactly what you want. And if it's way over budget, then the client's saying, what can we do? In this process, if you can give the budget, now you have the value-added options where you can go to your client and say, okay, everyone came in way over budget, but here are the ideas to either get you what you want, or if you can't afford that, then this is what you can afford within your cost constraint, within your budget.
And that will stand up to challenge.
Yeah, because everyone has the same opportunity. Once again, you have to be fair and open. So everyone has the same opportunity of bidding the same base proposal, and they all have the same opportunity of coming up with value-added ideas, right? So we're being totally fair. We can't predict what the right options are, because if we could, what would we do? We would have put that as a requirement, right? So that's why we've never had legally that issue. I think there was a hand back here. No? Okay. Now the last part is interviews. So we have past performance, risk assessment, value assessment, and now interviews. Interviews is the most critical component of this process, so of phase one. Not every project requires interviews, because that takes time from the vendors, it takes time from you, but if you have a risky project, you want to do interviews. What's risky? I mean, you define that. It could be high dollar, it could be a small dollar, but over the if it's a roof over your executive's office, that better go well. Okay, so risk is differently defined. We're going to interview the critical people. Has anyone participated in interviews or presentations? And how is that normally done? Explain to me. You have them come in, and who comes in from the, you raise your hand, from the vendor side, who comes in?
Usually there's 3 or 4 people.
3 or 4 people.
President of the company.
Okay.
And then I'm thinking of an IT situation.
That's fine. IT. Yeah,
So then
president.
they have
Different people.
3 or 4 other people in the different IT areas.
They come into the room, and how long are they typically in the room?
Well,
On average.
the one we just did, probably about an hour and a half.
An hour? Hour and a half, okay. And you ask them specific questions, or do they just present their proposal to you?
I gave them something ahead of time
Okay.
that they could have, all I wanted was a 15-minute presentation or whatever they wanted to do, and then after that, it was just gonna be questions and answers. And some of the questions I gave them ahead of time that we were gonna ask.
Yes.
Because I knew that there was some research or some
Okay.
information that needed to be presented.
For the rest of us, do we kind of do it the same way?
Yep.
Okay. What we've seen in doing it that way, when you bring them in, they normally can do a pretty good presentation because they practiced. And generally, who speaks the most? Sales or the president. The other people are there, and they may say, yes, no, my name's John Smith. But the rest of the time, they do what? They sit in the back, and the president or sales team is up front, and they talk like 90% of the time. And they're like, oh, we're going to do da-da-da-da. Is that correct? And the person back here is always like, what? Yeah? Uh-huh. What we've learned by eliminating the president, eliminating the sales team, and just having these people gives you a completely different interview. You'll be blown away by that. So in this process here, the president and the sales team, they're not permitted to attend the interview. They are told if they come to the building, they will have to wait outside. The only people allowed in the room are the people that they've written into the proposal that are going to be running this project. So in IT, it's probably the lead person, and then maybe a data integrator or a training person. Right? In construction, it's the project manager and site superintendent. In services, Pardon me?
What are the chances for cooperation from the vendor side when you require this?
Some vendors will say that's impossible to do. Okay, they're saying, well, we won't know until we get the award. When you hear that, what are you thinking to yourself?
They haven't hired me yet.
I mean, how are they using their best people to prepare the best proposal for you if they don't even know who they're going to assign? You should be saying what inside your head? Risk.
Yeah.
The red flag should be like jumping up, right? Risk, risk, risk. That's risky, right? We want vendors to do what? Pre-plan. We want them to identify who they're going to be assigning to you. And we want to interview those people. Why? We want to make sure that those people are what? Experts. See, what's funny is, could they have paid people to give them 10 survey scores? All 10 ratings on their surveys? Yes. Could they have kind of cheated the risk assessment and value assessment portion? Is there a way to cheat that? To pretend you're better than you really are? How can you do that?
Another expert.
Hire a consultant. Maybe just say, what are the biggest hospital risks on roofing projects on the internet? Hit enter and say, okay, copy and paste. They might be able to trick you. Can they trick you in an interview when you bring in a person and actually talk to them one-on-one? Oh man, it is tough. You can't fake expertise.
How do you know, though, that expert you're talking to is authorized to say that without?
We're going to ask them very simple, non-technical questions. So if we have 2 or 3 people from their company coming, we interview them one at a time, not as a group. The other people sit outside while we interview that one person. After 15 minutes, we switch people. There are 15-minute interviews. There are no presentations. This is simply an interview. The questions we ask are very simple. Can't bring any notes? The first question we normally ask is, why are you here today? Okay, non-technical. What do you expect them to say? If you are the project manager of an IT project and you're sitting here and I ask you, why are you here today? What would you say?
To get your business.
I want something better. What do I want to hear you say?
Address your needs and
To solve your problem.
Okay. I mean, all 3 of those answers seem about the same.
Talk about the project.
Be successful in the award.
Okay.
See
What don't I want to hear you say?
You'll know.
I have no idea. Okay, then I'm going to ask you, what are the greatest risks on this project? Now, if they just turn in a risk assessment, shouldn't they know what the greatest risks are? They should. But if they're not an expert, what are they going to do when you ask them that question? They're going to sit there and be like, I think the biggest risk is making, and I've seen this in construction, the biggest risk is making sure no one dies on your project. And you're saying, whoa, really? I mean, we don't really expect that on any project. But why is this project so risky to people dying? Oh, it's not. That's just our critical thing in construction. We want to make sure we're safe. I mean, that's not really a risk, right? You can actually tell people that haven't even read their own proposal. If they haven't read it, were they involved in it? I mean, these are all things inside your head that are spinning, right? It's saying risk. Then we say, get up on a whiteboard, and from start to end, give me a timeline. From start to end, give me all the critical actions, where the greatest risks are, where the milestones are, where the decision points are that you need actions from the client to make a decision. Who can do that?
perfect night.
It's the people that do that. Who can't do that? Sales. They'll get up, they'll try to do it, and they'll sit back down, and then they'll just try to talk to you and market you, right? You can see the difference. That is the most important part. If you want to change anything in your current system, I would propose doing this. on one project and see what the impact is. Interview only the person running the project, not the president, not the sales team. These are some of the comments we get. $10 million project. I didn't participate in this proposal. You understand I didn't write the risk assessment. That was done by our admin. I was just assigned to this project. I don't know if our schedule is realistic. I'm not currently employed by this company, but if we win the project, then they'll hire me. I've never managed a project of this size. There are no risks on this project on an IT. No risk, and we asked them like 3 times. The greatest risk is how to do everything the sales team promised we could do. That was an architect engineer. People are pretty honest, right? Do you have to, does the way they speak English impact this? I mean, if someone speaks English very well and says, I have no idea why I'm here, I mean, it's very easy to score that, right? A lot of vendors think, well, you know, especially in construction, my people don't speak English well. Trust me, it's not how well they dress or how well they speak, it's what they say. And you can tell very quickly. If you've actually interviewed like people for jobs yourself, I mean, you can tell like when you interview people, the people you want versus the people that you think are risky. Any questions on that? Now, someone mentioned roofing earlier. The same thing happened here. We had 4 roofers come in on a project in Oregon. They all had over 25 years experience as site superintendents. They all had outstanding performance, all had good experience. They came into the interview, 3 out of the 4 basically said, one of them said, I had just flown here today from Florida. I have no idea what this roof even looks like. One of them says, I have no idea what this roof looked like. I tried to look at it on Google Maps. We asked one of them, well, is the roof going to be okay because it doesn't have any taper on there? And one of them says, well, we can't tell you until I actually walk the roof. If they haven't even walked the roof, how good is their proposal? And if they're the expert and they have no idea about the roof, once again, how good is their proposal? I mean, once again, these are telling you signs of risk. Now, it's not the end of the world. All it means is if you're going to hire one of these vendors, what do you know now going into the project? That you may have problems. And you may need to assign resources from your end to do what? Try to increase performance. But if you get someone that's outstanding, what can you do? Now you can pull back and say, okay, we can use our resources where? On another project. Okay, so best value doesn't mean you're always going to get an expert that you're never going to have problems. All it does is it's a mechanism to identify risk. Okay, so here's the spreadsheet. So once again, we had the weight and criteria established in the RFP. Now we simply put it into an Excel spreadsheet. You can see all the firms are still coded. No one besides the procurement agent knows who anyone is. You have the raw data, converted to points, rated out of the 1,000 points, and the highest prioritized vendor, they're not awarded the project, they're the ones that are invited into phase 2. If for some reason things fall apart in phase 2 with this vendor, then what? We go to the second ranked vendor. Okay, any questions on the modeling?
I just have concerns about how you administer to make sure that you don't confuse these vendors since you've decided not to use their names.
How we will avoid confusing the vendors? We have to educate them. They have to be educated.
No, I mean on the back end side, on the administrative side of things.
Oh yeah, I mean you assign a code to there. So you got their procurement agent assigns a code to each proposal, and when the scores come back, it says code A gets a 5 score, code B gets a 10 score.
Once the RFP is posted, what's your typical timeline?
Okay, so typically right now you give what, 3 weeks for a vendor to propose, correct? About 3 weeks. Okay, from the time it closes until you award, or the time it takes to evaluate, how much time is that on average? I mean, if you're getting binders like this, a month? 2 weeks? Okay, the evaluation of those 4 pages takes 1 day. So you've cut down the evaluation from 2 to 6 weeks to 1 day. Now, on your first projects, I would give yourself some buffer and say 3 days, 4 days. And you can talk to Paul and Jurgens. They were in the evaluation committee. They can tell you exactly how long it takes. I mean, it takes like hours, not even a day, to evaluate like 10 proposals. So you save the time there, but we're going to use that time for what? Phase 2. Excuse me, for phase 2.
Just with your point score you mentioned before for financial contribution, you're looking at 20 to 30%. Is there, have you looked at what's optimal for risk assessment and value assessment in terms of the weighting?
Yeah, typically what we want to do is place the most weight on interviews, if you're doing interviews. So if a project is risky and you want to have the best people, place the most weight there, then place it on a risk assessment, then place it on the value assessment, and place the least amount on past performance. Because they can get anyone to say they're good, but you want to care about how well they think about your project, which is the risk assessment. So that's generally how we stagger the weight. You're obviously flexible in how you do it, but typically, that's generally about what we do. If cost goes down to 20%, we'll put more in interview and risk assessment. In other places, like in the state of Alaska, they had to give preference to local companies. So we had to have a criteria there that just said local companies. In Minnesota, we had to give criteria for targeted and minority businesses. We just added that in there. So whatever other requirements you may have legally or as a policy, I mean, you add that in there and you assign a weight to it. Yes?
One of the features that we found really interesting in the evaluation, you'll see the scores and that dominance and the gap between the highest and the second highest. So in our traditional RFPs, we've got a 98, a 97, a 96, a 95, and how do you distinguish between them all? In this method where you're scoring the 1, 5, 10, you end up with a gap of, 200 or 20 points out of 100 between the expert that you've identified and the next one. So there's caution in going to number 2 in this scenario because they're quite low by comparison to the other expert. And that normally is what happens is you find that dominant one is up near 1,000 and the other one's down near 800.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep moving. So we've identified the vendor we want to invite into phase 2 and have them do a detailed pre-plan clarification of the project. The goal here is for them to minimize all surprises. Okay, what could cause a surprise on any of your project? What are some things that could cause a surprise? Finishing late, cost increases, dissatisfaction, what else?
Well, would you find out that something they proposed didn't meet your spec?
Yes, that would cause you a surprise. What about requiring you to do things that you can't do? Like we expect you to be here on Saturday and Sunday, right? That could cause a surprise. So their requirement now is to identify anything that could potentially cause a surprise to you. So they've got to walk us through their detailed project, give us a detailed plan. This is now where they'll give us additional documents. All the technical specs, right? They will give us the technical specs. A detailed cost breakdown. A list of all the assumptions. Align all the expectations, what your roles, responsibilities are, the metrics, and identify and minimize all other risks. So once again, if you had other risks up front that no one identified, this is where we minimize those risks. This is where we're essentially doing our due diligence. We're not negotiating, so we're not having them change their proposal. All we're doing is clarifying that their proposal has captured everything. And at the end, they're going to turn in their final document. So this final document has no page limits. It's going to incorporate a lot of what they turned in here, plus additional information. right? Nothing changes the scope. All it does is clarify what they're proposing. And at that point, then you'll issue the award. What we found in doing this, in projects we compared that ran no phase 2, and in projects where we allowed the vendors, just tell us how much time you want. They picked 10 days, about 2 weeks. We were able to reduce change orders by 70% and schedule delays by 70%. Okay, so if you look at your project, a lot of times clients look at their project in terms of, let's just award this tomorrow. What we need to educate them is, hey, if we can award it next week, but I can actually complete it a month ahead of time, does that add value? Some clients will say, no, award it tomorrow. But some clients that are smart will say, hey, if I can get this done a month or 6 weeks faster, then it makes sense to spend the time and effort. And then we'll issue the award. Move into phase 3, which is just our metrics. So we want the vendor submitting weekly reports, only addressing anything that deviates from time and money. That's it. Okay, so it's not like a weekly log or a daily log. It's anything that deviates from time or money. We want that put into a spreadsheet, submitted every week. And if you're doing a lot of projects, for example, construction, this works very well, and maybe small IT, where you have a large number of these projects, and they're submitting these reports, you can actually collect and compile this information. We did this at the University of Minnesota, and now get an analysis of all your projects. And you can actually track change order rates, schedule delay rates, and who's causing it. And in Minnesota, we saw out of the 7% overall change order rate, 5% is due to clients. Another 1.5% is other internal university partners. We have a designer, and the contractor change order rate was 0.1%. Right? But we always think it's the contractor's fault, and all our research has shown it's not. And this is the documentation. What's interesting here is BestValue, percent of projects where BestValue had the lowest cost, 53% of the time. So most people think that higher performers cost you more. It doesn't. Our research has shown the opposite. The higher performers, had the highest cost less than 7% of the time. In the majority of cases, they were either lowest price or second lowest price. How can they be the lowest price and best value but give you higher performance than they would in low bid? How is that possible?
More efficient.
Yes, but what does that mean, more efficient?
They're an expert.
We asked them, I mean, what exactly does that mean? They said, well, basically, if we can go into a project and not have to argue with you every day and not have to be told how to do our work, we can actually finish 50% faster. If we can finish 50% faster, we can do what? Move on to our next project. So we don't have to charge you anymore, because if you allow us to be efficient, we can make more profit. So it's counterintuitive. People think that higher performers are going to cost you more on the initial cost. It's not the case. They've been the lowest cost 50 to 60% of the time. Now, in terms of a fair process, if you run a lot of projects, instead of picking your favorites now, everyone is coded, and if you have an emergency project, now the university is going to code contractor 118. They don't even know who that is. They say, we have an emergency, can we get a cost proposal from 118? Procurement goes back, reveals 118, gets a proposal from them. It's no longer based on your favorite, it's based on performance. It's a relationship based on performance, not based on, I like you. Right? This now encourages other contractors or providers to start bidding with you. Right? And we can track all the details with change orders. We have a lot of information. But once again, what we found in our research, the biggest issues have not been on the supplier side. It's been on the client side. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right? But it just helps us. It gives us ways to improve. Right? They estimated they saved about $42 million doing this. So in essence, once again, we have phase 1 and phase 2 occur before award. Everyone competes in phase 1. We look at past performance, risk, value, and interviews. We narrow it down to a clarification, and that one vendor documents the service. So we have a little bit of time. Let's run through some quick case studies because some of these are interesting. This was just a simple roofing project. This is over a hospital facility in Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana. And the U.S. Army said, well, we're in the middle of nowhere. There's only 2 people in this area that will even come here. So there's no sense in running Best Value. And we know who the best roofer is. Well, the management said, no, we're going to test this. This is a pilot. So they had us run it, and we got 6 different vendors. So they were surprised they got 6 to come out in the middle of nowhere. We rated the 6, and we said, okay, we need to shortlist to interview. And you can see kind of the scores there. And they said, okay, let's shortlist everyone except what? E, right? Because they had the lowest score. And we said, well, this is your first one. Why don't we just interview everyone? They said, no, they're so bad, we don't want to interview them. That turned out to be their best roofer. When I revealed the names, they said, wait, why would our guys say those things? We want to change our scores. And the bosses said no. So they didn't even interview their best, supposedly best roofer. Right? We came in with all the data. I think their budget was about 1.2 or 1.3 million. So only one person was over budget. The rest were well under budget. Vendor A, you can see the scoring, 93 points out of 100. They weren't the lowest price, but what? They weren't the highest. Probably about average. Now moving into phase 2 with this vendor, do you see any risks or things you want to address with that vendor before we award? Yeah, look at their schedule. So if we bring in that vendor in phase 2 and say, why is your schedule 100% faster than everyone else? And they say, well, we're just efficient. What's our response? Right? So they come back and said, they actually came back and said, well, we're using an alternate system. We expect that everyone is doing either a built-up or modified, where you have all these solar panels that have all the penetrations, and they have to cut their system and flash the penetrations to stop water leaks. We're using a spray foam system. We can just spray right onto the penetration, so it doesn't take us any time. Okay, now what's our response? Have you ever done it before? They said, oh yeah, all of these references are for this system. Now what's our response?
You want to see if they're satisfied with it.
Yes. Now we start calling. And so they started calling these references, and every single one of them said, this is a great system. We've had this for like 20 years, no problems. At that point, we're like, maybe this is something we should consider. And they did. They eventually awarded it to vendor A. This vendor actually finished in 60 days. This was right before Hurricane Katrina hit. Katrina hit and did no damage to this roof. Now, this wasn't on the coast, but still, all the other buildings in the area were significantly damaged. Right? So that's what phase 2 is for, is to minimize your risk. You see risk here, you better not proceed until they resolve that risk. Right? And this is the comparison versus Best Value, who they would have picked. Now, this isn't to say that you're best. Even right now, you may think you have the best, and they may be a great vendor, but what this allows you to do is see maybe there's someone that's even better. Right? You may be getting someone good, but there may be other people that are even better than what you think is good. And this will attract those type of vendors. University of Alberta, they've done a number of projects. They were our first client in Canada. And these are their first 3 projects: janitorial, custodial services. They ran it under Best Value, and they were able to save $2 million. They were actually able, I think they had a team of like 6 people internally managing the custodian because they were doing such a bad job. They've actually reassigned all but one of those people, right? Because the vendor's performing. Design build. This was a cyclotron, so it's like a nuclear facility to do cancer research. And basically build a building. It was delivered on time, on budget. They built a similar building, and they estimated that this was the savings. $8 to $12 million in cost savings on one project. And they've done a number of different projects at the university. Up in Ontario, We were awarded a grant through the province as a consortium of 5 different universities, Western, Waterloo, Ottawa, Queen's, and Laurier, to come in and help them in implementing some of this. And so to date, we've done furniture services, recycling, waste management, IT services. And on this IT project, once again, in this system, they thought they would get maybe 1 or 2 proposals. They ended up getting 6 proposals. And the vendor that they picked was a vendor they've never heard of. And they said, after we showed the names, that if this had been done traditionally, that vendor would have never got the award because they had never heard of that vendor name or the system that they were proposing. But after going through phase 2, they said, this is an outstanding system. But they would have never had that opportunity under their traditional system. Parking management,
Question.
yes,
Do you use past performance?
yes. But as a university, they had never heard of that. So that vendor still had great past performance somewhere else. It's just we haven't heard of them. And the typical response is, if we never heard of him, let's not try it out. Because we know someone that should be awarded the project. Right? The no names really made it fair. We have a consortium of 6 universities doing travel management. And then they have their retirement income. This is at $1.2 billion. Their first phase is about $250 million. And we're running that right now. Okay, so a lot of different types. We have construction, we have furniture, we have IT. Once again, all across Canada, everyone's doing something differently. In Dalhousie, they ran a very simple excavation project. I think it was like $300,000. Right? And people are saying, well, there's not a lot of impact there. The project they ran finished 3 weeks ahead of time, and the vendor actually tried to give the university back money. And the university says, well, you can't give us back money. And they had just run an exact similar excavation project like a month before that was like right across the street, and this project finished 18% over budget and 3 weeks delayed. Okay, so there is a difference. Even on simple projects, you can see the outcome. In Simon Fraser, we're doing IT, architect engineering services. I mean, everyone's doing a large variety of procurements, but it's all the same issues. It's people. It's trying to get the best people regardless of your procurement. You know, the comments from, we don't have to go through all this, but the client, the evaluators have really liked this. This has sped up their time. They can do it in a day. And look what's interesting at some of these vendor comments. We had virtually fired the university because we could not see any opportunity to approach the process. All right, so some interesting comments from your vendors. And right now we're actually doing a collaboration with all the universities. We just had a meeting last week in Victoria where all these clients got together, and they're going to figure out ways to learn from one another and create a consortium of best value experts across Canada. So that's our goal. I mean, if some of you are interested, I mean, we're still trying to develop that, but I think that's it. So that's an overview of the process. Any questions? Yes?
Does the process include EOIs or RFIs, or do you just use the traditional method and then just bring it forward with the RFP?
No, and maybe Jurgen and Paul can talk about that. Yes, we also have ways of making RFIs a lot simpler. Yeah. Yeah, you can use a lot of these techniques in different ways. So moving forward, I mean, some of you may be doing some of these components, and I would propose just taking bits and pieces and seeing if it has an impact. A lot of these universities, what they did is, some of them just did the 1, 5, 10 scale, and some of them just brought in the key people for the interviews and didn't allow anyone else in. And doing those 2 things, they saw outstanding impacts. So there are bits and pieces you can try to see the differences here before you try to tackle everything. Now, you know, Paul and Jurgens, if you guys want to come up, and you guys can like drill them now, because right now I sound like I'm just sales and marketing, right? We have the people that actually experience this. Come on, Jurgens, don't be shy.
I didn't know that was part of the presentation.
I know.
Well, that wasn't planned.
It's not planned, but you guys can add the best value. Any questions for our two folks up here? Or do you have anything to add that I didn't cover that you think is important?
I would add, there's one thing we heard in Victoria, which you may have had experience with, but we never thought of, was to put a sole source through the best value procurement process. So you have this requirement, and there's nobody else that can do it, and maybe you agree that, okay, it's a sole source situation, but you put them through that process. So they've got to go and get surveys completed. They have to be evaluated so that you can gain confidence, and hopefully they do come up with a high score, that that is truly a good supplier to contract with.
Obviously, from a procurement perspective, you know, the concept makes sense, but you're gonna have to pitch it at a higher level. So what kind of hurdles did you have to go through to pitch it in order to proceed with this type of model?
We did have to make presentations to executive councils to get their take on it, and then make the pitch to individual client areas like IST, physical plant as well. There's actually a physical plant that started it here last year, so they were already on board by attending the conferences. So it's a matter of pitching it, seeing what their responses are. Really what the responses are is, why aren't we doing this now? Like, it's a no-brainer.
So positive.
Positive. Why aren't we doing this? This doesn't make any sense not to. But then I've learned from the presentations, and I add a slide, here's why you won't like it. And it's one of the main reasons is because you're not picking the supplier that you may like. It's blind. You don't know who you're picking. You're only picking the best, not the one you want. Not so bad.
How many people do you involved in the interview from your side?
For our first project was dining, and it was very political, so I think we had 5 to 7 people, because it was a highly visible project, but on most procurements, it's just the 3 to 5 evaluators, whoever they are.
The same people that were the evaluators in phase one
Yeah.
were also the interviewers for phase one. Okay.
Did you use that, or could it be used on something like the Investors Group Field, which is a huge project?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And it wasn't.
Here's on a multi-million-dollar project.
But it wasn't.
No, we had just taken on this concept over a year ago, and so we're just starting to get into other examples of where we can use it. There's something I was going to say about the blind evaluation, and Abby, you had asked a question about identifying, is there any confusion of supplier A, B, or C? What I felt really cool in going through some of these evaluations is that there are pieces of this evaluation. By the way, the evaluation, I'm going to be back up. We get the proposal, let's say, typically 4 o'clock on a certain date, and it closes. The next day, the evaluators are assigned a 2-hour time frame from 10 o'clock till 12 o'clock to do their evaluations separately. They submit it to purchasing services, who is already doing the financial component of that RFP. By 2 o'clock, 2:30, we get together as a group, we present the scores, and we move into phase 2. This is the supplier that we're going to move to phase 2. So it takes a day, but really it's just a few hours. It's evaluated very quickly, and it's a real cool thing to go through. Back?
This sounds very similar to negotiable RFPs. I'm just beginning to hear a lot of that in public procurement organizations moving towards that. Have you had any experience with using both, or is it just the wording is different?
I haven't had experience in using negotiated RFPs. I have been involved in the presentations of negotiable RFPs, and I don't find these similar. They're different in the aspect of how you come up with the one supplier and the filters, the evaluations, the scores, the blind, the not presenting a proposal, but presenting qualifications. The proposal is only evaluated in phase 2. I see differences in that negotiable RFP. I see Monique looking at us as well here. Monique, are you familiar with the negotiable RFP and the differences between
I haven't
Best
applied them
Value?
either, I've been
No.
to lots of seminars, yes.
I have a question. So the proposal, since this is blind, the proposal, did we present it at the selection stage or at the clarification stage?
The proposal is really determined at the clarification stage. You're not looking at evaluating how they will do this, how they'll perform this project. You're looking at whether they're an expert or not. Phase two is when you're getting into, okay, you've already submitted your proposal, so you're caught by that. Like, it's not like you can now invent your proposal. It's already been presented, but it hasn't been evaluated, it hasn't been opened yet. And phase two is when you're evaluating. So this is what your proposal's all about. And then John was showing what that supplier, that one supplier, has to go through in phase two to identify what possible risk there might be. But all the other suppliers are now out of the picture. And so they didn't have to spend the time on that part, just the one that's actually moving forward.
So how do you handle commercial non-compliancy? So when purchasing looks at the document and finds out that the vendors aren't commercially compliant, how do you deal with that?
Well, we try and use a lot of we have the right to, and we may disqualify you. John was alluding to the fact that sometimes what we're doing initially is trying to give some leeway. When it comes to if they've submitted 10 pages instead of 2, we have to disqualify them because we're trying to attract people into this process. And at first we want to make sure we get a good number of suppliers. And so, you know, our process here, we haven't come across it, but you know, using the academic formula of the first 2 pages of your 10 pages is what we're going to read, and that's what we're going to evaluate. So we don't toss you out, but we're going to make sure that through this process, and all the suppliers go through this, so that this is an orientation that they will attend, and John, or now we're learning, we're going to present this to our suppliers. We train them on what we will accept and what we won't, so we really don't get non-compliance because they've all gone through the pre-conference process of identifying exactly what is required.
Engineer, the RFI that you mentioned is actually a good way to prime your vendor base that you will be coming out with a process called BestValue. And even if you're new to the process, it helps you. You have the opportunity at that point to ask them what would they like to see in a BestValue RFP to allow them to demonstrate their expertise. So it helps you build that RFP that way too. So it's a good opportunity to do that right from the start if you are interested in pursuing the process further.
So this follows the internal trade agreement, like what you're doing here?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've had our legal counsel involved in the review of the process to ensure that it does meet AIT and any other public tendering requirements. It's passed the test, not just for us, but across the country in public institutions, to start with, mostly with universities.
I can see how this makes it faster for procurement, because they're not evaluating proposal until the clarification stage.
Yeah.
But from the vendor aspect, even though they're not documenting the proposal and submitting this many pages, they still have to do all the background work to come up with a price.
Yes.
So their cost savings and the simplification in this is mainly the paperwork, but the work is still the same. So what
Yes.
they're paying their technical experts and the hours they're putting in, they
Yes.
still have that documentation
Yes,
behind it.
but now they can feel more comfortable because now they have a better opportunity at winning, because now it's like, it's random if you're gonna read the right pages in this document. Now it gives them an advantage, and now they feel more comfortable in using those people versus let's just pull it off the shelf and hope we get the project, and then once we get it, then we'll bring our technical people in.
So you haven't had a lot of situations where when you get to the clarification phase, they're doing a lot of changes
No.
or?
No, because they're educated, there can't be changes. So they cannot wait until phase 2 to then bring in their experts, because if their experts come in phase 2 and say, oh no, we can't do this, that doesn't make sense, then they have to withdraw. They can't change their proposal, this isn't negotiation.
So just to follow up on that, do you then feel that all the proponents would have almost contemplated that they would get to phase 2, so they would have that as their document, you get the phone call, submit phase 2, that it would be written already?
That's what the smart vendors should be doing already.
How much time do you give them from the phone call to submit phase 2? Are you giving them a week?
No, well, phase 2, they already have their project plan submitted. It's just not evaluated. So they had to meet that 4 o'clock deadline with their project plan. We just haven't looked at it.
Oh, okay.
So then we move to phase 2, we go,
Then you
okay,
look
so
at
you
it,
say,
okay.
now we're getting ready, in a week or so, we want to meet with you, we're going to go through these details, John's list of all the other things you're going to come to the table with, that's what we're looking for, so.
Yeah,
we
there's
get
still
together.
others, so in our
Yeah.
first dining service project, the vendor said, okay, next week I'm gonna fly my entire team. that had like 5 people. We're gonna fly them out, and we wanna meet with you for 3 solid days, and we wanna iron out everything, right? So in construction, it's normally faster. It's normally like in a week, the contractors can go through everything and have it laid out. But on our service, it's been a little bit longer, especially IT, because that's where we find that the IT vendors very rarely pre-plan. And that's a lot of times where it's the first time they're actually looking at it. So in IT, it could take a month to 6 weeks just in phase 2. Now you can reduce it, but all that means is the less time you give them in phase 2, the more risk you have. The more time you can spend, the more you're aware of your outcome. So you can make it as long and short as you want. We just have found the more time you allow the vendor, the better your outcome is. But if you're typically spending, if you're typically spending 6 weeks in evaluation and now it's a day, the overall process should be the same or shorter. Sorry.
Just curious, but are you following a different process when it comes to procuring goods that would be more product or equipment based that maybe don't have the same amount of service or installation or construction components?
We've started looking at more of the service side of things, but as we look at this process and understand the kind of RFPs we're putting out, we're looking at supply and install is applicable here as well. With our construction projects, we've got one that just initiated or thought of now that is a window installation. And so it's mostly product, but there are going to be some risks and there could be some value adds in that project, and we'll put that through.
Yeah, a good example was that furniture project at the University of Western. You know, it's a small $50,000 project and it's furniture. I mean, furniture's our commodity, right? There's maybe 3 suppliers. And the PM there said there isn't a lot of value because it's kind of a commodity. Well, the furniture itself, yeah, that may be a commodity. What's not a commodity? It's the servicing, right? It's actually delivering the furniture, right? So that's where the people are involved. And so after running it at the end of that, she said, well, this is the first time she's run a furniture project where she didn't have to fight the supplier to deliver the furniture on time. So she said, yeah, I didn't think there would be value, but this is the first time I didn't have to fight with the supplier. So yes, there may be commodities out there, but if they involve like any sort of service or people, I mean, that's where it may make a difference.
You might have noticed the session is being videotaped, and so we will have a videotape of this available to you as well. Once we've gone through the editing, we'll put it on our website. We'll let those know that registered by email for this session, and then they can let you know if they if you didn't have your email direct, so you're able to see this over and over again.
Is there also a way to get an example RFP?
Yeah, actually, when we put this up on our website, you'll see that there's a best value section. And there's instructions for suppliers, there's this presentation, there'll be an example of an RFP about evaluation criteria and so on. So there'll be sort of a kit there that you can take a look at. It's open to all.
Now, we have a grant with the University of Manitoba. We'll be here for the next year. We have several trips lined out. If you guys are interested in setting something up internally for your organization, I mean, you know, if we'll be out here, we can set that up.
At what cost?
If we're out here, we'll do it for free. But we do have seminars as well. We got one coming up in Ontario, a full 3-day seminar of this, where you'll meet a lot of the other universities. If
So
you're
I'll have to go back to the office and say an unsolicited proposal? I'm kidding.
It's R&D.
If you want education, yeah, that's all we do. I mean, that's what our grant is for, is to educate. I mean, our goal is not to be procurement consultants. We're here to educate the university and get out as fast as possible. So that's, as a researcher, that's what makes us different than consultants. I mean, we're not here to stick around your organization and be a leech. We're here to get out as fast as possible. So if you're interested in the slides, if you're interested in the seminars, if you want to set up something internally, education, give me a business card, write that on the back. If all you want is the slides, and that's fine. Anything else you want, leave that, and then we'll try to get you the slides as soon as we can.
Or you can get a hold of me again. You've already got my email address, and I will pass it along to you.
And hopefully you got some value. Thanks for all your time.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.